It looked like rain. I could feel it in the air. And even though there was only an overcast sky, and not so much the heavy clouds that Sembia usually showcased before a good rain, my intuition told me it was going to rain heavily. We had just crept up to the copse of cypress trees that Ali was going to climb. I had been successful at distracting the captain of the guard, albeit just barely. I had only just managed to escape being a dead person by an inch, indeed an inch of steel, that had only grazed my left bicep, as the captain had tried to run me through. I knew I had to get him away from Ali, but when my first distraction didn't work completely, I knew I'd have to try again. The first time I attempted to sound like an animal, shaking some bushes and trotting away from them like an imbecile. When the captain didn't fully commit to following me, I had stealthily crept around to a position off behind him a ways, but just as I was about to mimic an animal once again, I had a momentary lapse of dexterity. A limb from a dead tree in the underbrush snagged my boot, and I fell hard into a thicket of brambles. The subsequent pain, mixed with the brambles, which grabbed and caught on every last bit of clothing, had caused me to thrash about to get myself out of the thicket, quickly enough not to be caught dead to rights by the captain. This caused the captain to march on me with full haste, sword drawn, and I had to run as hard as I could, just to escape the swings of his blade. As he attempted to kill me, I managed barely to get to a small, open area, and drew my cutlass. He had paused then, not expecting a fight, and I didn't give him one, even though I wanted to test my skills and see if I still had what it took to defeat a swordsman of some prowess. But I then realized that our entire mission, and any chance of obtaining the Orb of Finality, would be dashed if I got into a full-on sword fight. So instead, thinking quickly on my feet, I took a ball of powder the wizard Vare had made. He called them instant midnight balls, a name that I liked a lot, for it fit perfectly, and I threw it, as hard as I could, at the captain's face. He attempted to bat it away with his sword, and while his level of skill was very good, it was not the outcome he'd expected, for when he sliced the marble-sized ball in half, the powder within burst forth, and a cloud of magically imbued, toxic sleeping agent engulfed him, torso and face, rendering him immediately unconscious. From what Master Vare had told me, the midnight balls would render a 200-pound individual unconscious for a period of 3 hours if they were left undisturbed, and then, once they awoke, they wouldn't be able to function normally for a full day, and would suffer from migraine headaches and nausea for that entire span. So, being satisfied that the captain was no longer going to be a problem, I dragged his body underneath a heavily overgrown area nearby, covering him with his cloak, then branches and leaves until he was sufficiently hidden from view, not forgetting to take what valuables he had on his person, which included a finely made necklace of gold, and nearly a month's wages inside his coin purse. I left him his sword, and a fine dagger he'd kept in his boot, for both looked to be made to fit him, and were likely badges of office, which would be hard to fence anyway. And as a man, I couldn't take something he'd worked very hard to get and was very proud of, likely, without damaging what honor I had left, for he'd shown no fear, and indeed, had shown honor when he'd turned to face me, for when he'd looked me in the eye, he stepped back a pace onto his hind foot, which was a formal declaration of intent between swordsmen. Only those who were trained in the old ways, the honorable ways, did that, and when he'd looked into my eyes, I saw an honorable man there. In another life, we might have been friends. After leaving the captain in his hidden spot, I made my way quickly and quietly back towards the cypress trees, where Ali would be waiting to rendezvous with me. Of course, she was there, in a deep shadow, next to the tallest of the 3 cypress trees. The Hewlands' mansion was just a rock toss from my position, and only a short leap from hers. There were likely going to be a few other folk about, but as of yet I'd spotted no one. When she spotted me, she put a finger to her beautiful lips, motioning for me to be quiet. Then she signed to me with haste that a sentry was just off to her left, obviously out of my view, for I couldn't see him. I nodded, and then made my way, as quietly as I could, which was extremely quiet, around to a point near to the closest corner of the mansion. From there I could see the guard she was worried about, and he was very close to her, but hadn't yet spotted her. He was only a couple of arm spans away from her, but was distracted with a faulty tinder twig he was having trouble lighting. Then, just as I thought he was going to walk on past where OWLIE was hidden. He succeeded at lighting his match, and a light burst forth from it, illuminating the entire area near to him, including the spot OWLIE was hidden. Immediately I was alarmed, for anyone could have plainly seen her now, lit up like a damn torch. I had to act fast, and searched for a stone frantically, almost losing my cool. But professionalism won the day as I managed not to freak out. I found a good stone, and then found a spot to throw it that would make enough of a racket, not to alert everyone about, but just the guard. I tossed the rock, and it clattered off the cobblestone pathway, near to the mansion, next to a tall set of bushes, perfect and like clockwork. The sentry turned his head and called out to the darkness by the bushes. When he got no answer, he got curious, and made his way that direction, speaking to whomever it was he thought was there. I suppose he thought it was a fellow guard named Lars, for that was the name he said, and went on about how the shift was almost up, and so forth. I don't know about Lars, but it was true that the shift was almost up for the sentry before me. I crept up behind him and choked him unconscious, looting his body for valuables, of which he had only a key. But I took that, as it might be a key to something of value. He got off work early that evening after all, good for him. I hid his body behind the bushes there, and decided to sacrifice another midnight ball, to keep him unconscious for longer. I then made my way to a spot where I was still hidden from view, but could see OWLIE. But she was already up the cypress, and had leapt across to the mansion's second-floor balcony. I smiled, for she was truly amazing. Then I let out a short whistle, one which she would recognize as an all clear, and shortly thereafter I heard one in return. Now, my first task was accomplished. When we'd laid out the tasks, mine were the most cut and dry. Task 1. Make sure OWLIE gets inside the mansion without issue. Task 2. Find another way into the mansion, by whatever means, disguise, another entrance, what have you. Task 3. Find the orb, or find OWLIE, then find the orb, whichever came first. So, without delay I sneaked off into the shadows once again, and went in search of another way into the mansion.
The strange onyx door was easy enough to figure out. I still had no idea what significance the door being made out of onyx had, but whatever it was, it didn't appear that it affected my business in any way. After returning Denner's all clear, I easily slid the onyx door open about as wide as could fit my body if I went in sideways. It was just as I opened the door that the rain began to fall, thunder rolling from far off. I slid the door shut behind me as I entered, and then I stayed there, crouched, scanning the room I was in now with my eyes, and listening carefully with my ears. The room itself was silent, but I could hear the night's festivities commencing from the level below me. From the sound of it, the selection process had just begun, as a quartet of stringed instruments began to play a pleasant, festive, yet somehow dark, melody, and the sounds of hurrahs and huzzahs were heard, as the guests of both sexes began to have a good time. In my mind's eye, I could envision the drunken and otherwise intoxicated group downstairs, half-naked women, or some without any clothing at all, jiggling and bouncing as their breasts and rumps swayed, this way and that, in their attempts to catch the golden rings the men were tossing at them. The men, with their pompousness, richly dressed, chortling with masculine glee as they tossed their rings, laughing at the comical display, but no doubt, swelling behind their codpieces as they ogled the women. Cheers resounded as the first round came to a close, and I imagined a crying woman, running from the room, embarrassed and dejected, Having spent all that time and all that effort just to fail at the moment of truth. Meanwhile, the winner of that round, likely a young, ripe, sexually charged lass, based on the sound she made when she cheered, congratulating herself on her win, was being led, no doubt, to the winner's lounge to be catered to while she awaited the rest of the guests as the competition resumed. Convinced that the party downstairs would be sufficient as a distraction, I felt much better about my chances of success and remaining undetected. As far as the room I was in, it was a drab, fairly empty one. Aside from the love seat in the corner and a small wardrobe, I quickly searched the wardrobe, and to my surprise, I found a black cloak within it, and upon touching it to judge the fabric quality, I felt the telltale tingle of magic imbued within the garment. I put the cloak about my shoulders carelessly, for magical garments and items could be dangerous to the wearer. But my intuition told me this one was not. Immediately, I felt lighter on my feet, and stronger, as if everything I carried had suddenly become weightless. For an exact knowledge of the magical nature of the cloak, I would have to consult with the wizard Praesphere, but it seemed that it was a cloak of strength, possibly more. But I knew I felt stronger for certain. I crept to the door that led from the room to what I was guessing would be a hallway, and paused. I put my ear to the door and listened. Aside from the latent noise coming up from the festivities downstairs, I heard nothing. So I crept out into the hallway and began my methodical search of the rooms connected to it. Starting with the first room on the right, I checked the door. No noise from within, so I entered, closing the door behind me. What I saw then was this. I was in a sort of sitting room, the design of which was decidedly dark, almost unnerving. In the center of the room was a table, with 2 chairs, one on each side. In the center of the table was a large tome, sat open. A large window sat in the wall behind it, showing the gardens outside, flashes of lightning periodically lighting the vista beyond, raindrops splashing against it. On my right were some decidedly ghoulish paintings, depicting various shadowy specters floating or flying about draconian scenery. On my left was a slender door, leading into the next room, and 2 alcoves just before it, one with a statue of an owl, also dark and menacing looking. The other alcove held a wooden box, with a lock upon its front, keeping the contents within secure. The floor was made of slatted wood, and there were inscriptions carved into it on certain areas, the language of which I was uncertain. It looked almost elvish, maybe dwarven, in origin, to me, but I was no linguist. I felt oddly uneasy when I tried to read the inscriptions, as if the writing held some kind of a natural power to it. I immediately didn't like the room, and my body seemed to dislike it as well, for I felt a bit nauseous, and even slightly dizzy. I wasn't sure if it was due to the script on the floor or something else, but my dizziness didn't seem to be going away, so I figured I would try, and search the room as quickly as I could, then get out of there. The most obvious place to start was the box, so I quickly crept across the room to the alcoves, ignoring the owl for now, and examined the box closely. Now that I was up close, I saw that the box was macabre in design, skulls and designs of a skeletal nature, depicting bones, in fact. Possibly they were indeed the actual bones of some kind of marsupial creature. They were part of the box frame. There was a small lock on the front, and I fought the urge to pick the lock right then. I knew better. I had to make certain the box was safe. My dizziness was slowly getting worse, and I now had a splitting headache, and I knew then that something in the room was causing it, for certain. Against my better judgment, I decided to stay in the room and use a scroll to determine if the box was safe to try and open, or even touch. Producing a spell scroll from my pack, I, as quickly as I could, unrolled it and read the incantation upon it, written in the arcane script of Master Vare, as he had shown me how to read his own personal writings. I prayed to Tamora for luck in the recitation, and she seemed to favor me, for the scroll turned to dust with a poof, and I immediately saw the effects of the spell of true sight I had just cast. Immediately, the first thing I saw was the box lighting up like the sons of Toril, mainly the lock, but the bones and a small skull in the middle, just above the lock, all glowed a bright red, indicating they were imbued with harmful magic. I then looked around the room, and to my surprise, I saw that nearly everything in the room was enchanted with one form of magical energy or another. The portraits on the wall glowed lavender in my vision, telling me that they were full of protective magic, likely a magical trap cast upon them, or a ward against theft or possible destruction. The owl glowed a brightly hued blue, telling me that it was deadly to the touch, and the book in the center of the room was aglow with orange hues, indicating that it had area of effect magic woven into its very makeup. That meant it was likely the cause of my dizziness. I decided then and there that the box was likely where the orb was hidden, and the book was meant to keep people out, and that the solution to this was far beyond my abilities to decipher. I knew I couldn't grab the box, not only because of the harmful, possibly deadly wards cast upon it, but also since, if the orb of finality was within it, then my thoughts would likely cause the doom of existence, at least my own. I had to find Denner and go back to the mage and tell him what I'd discovered.